Hi there, welcome back to another episode of Point and Click Puzzle Games with myself, Angela McCall, whereby we are on lesson 2 of our journey on building a Tic Tac Toe, or also known as Noughts and Crosses board game, mobile app game. And in the last video, if you haven't already, we were literally just setting up our project environment, and it's kind of like the sort of the boring stuff. But in this lesson, we're going to get our hands dirty. We're actually going to start coding and putting things on our app display in our simulator and actually bringing our game to life. So we are going to be looking at the composer scene and the composer library so that you can understand what's going on in the memory of your game just that little bit more. And we're also going to just create those player counters that cross and that circle, that's it, as it were, to be able to put something on the display just to make sure everything is working correctly. Okay, so then we are going to dive right on over to my left hand monitor screen, and if you haven't been here before, do remember that do subscribe and stay notified, but remember that the ethos of this channel is to teach teenagers upwards and adults who've never coded before how to basically start doing so using a very simple programming language called Lua, which is why we are looking at app design, because we thought we'd be a little bit different than just doing the bog standard HTML and website design that everybody else does on YouTube. So as you can see on my screen at the moment, we've got our Corona simulator open, we've got our console open telling us what's going on here in the memory of the game, and this is exactly where we left it at the end of the first video. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to open the main.lua file. Now, if you remember in that last video, what I said happens is as the file, the app loads into the device memory, the device needs to know which file to start the program with. And so this is the equivalent of your index.html file in a website, where the browser searches for the that index.html file to be able to get the website up and loaded. In the Lua, or the programming environment for your mobile app, this main.lua file is the same difference. Now, we are just going to quickly, I want you just to copy what I've done pretty much at the moment, and I'm going to explain it in just a second when we get to our next scene. But we're going to load in the composer library, which I'm going to show you more about in just a moment, and there'll be links below. Okay, and then what we've also got going on is we are going to just add in one other little line of code for the moment, which is going to remove this time, day, power, signal, and that kind of thing, the clutter on the screen, because we don't want it. Now, by adding this line of command here in the main.lua file, it means that it's going to affect every single file that follows. So it's handy, because then we don't have to repeat that on each scene that we basically create. And remember that scenes are another way of saying sort of the file name, as it were. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to go to, I'm going to use that composer library, and it has a function called go to scene. Okay, whereby in brackets we can actually name the scene. Now, we've got no scenes created just yet, but I'm going to use the same naming convention that I always use. So I'm going to put in speech marks for the moment GP1, because that's gameplay scene 1, which is a way that I always program my apps. Not necessarily that important in this particular app, because we are literally only going to have that one gameplay scene. But if you can imagine, if you were, I don't know, traversing a forest and you found a cottage into the footpath to the garden or whatever it is, you'd have all of these different scenes coming up on the app, and so you'd have to design those, and that's why you would need lots of different gameplay scenes. So I'm just going to call this GP1. That's the scene that we want to go to, and then I'm just going to literally copy in a little sort of visual effects so that it's just the way that I code. And again, we're going to look at this function in a minute, but we're basically going to say sort of transition that fade from one scene out and the next one coming in on screen with a crossfade effect, so it looks nice to the user's point of view. And we're going to do it over 1 second, okay, which is milliseconds, so that's why it says 1000 here. Now I'm just going to save this, and it's going to cause an error because it's now going to look for a scene GP1 that we haven't yet created. So let's create GP1. So I'm going to go up to here, new file, And I'm literally just going to instantly save it so that it exists. Make sure that we're in the correct folder, and I'm literally just going to call this GP1. And if you just make sure that you pay attention here to save as type. Now if it doesn't list Lua, which it should do, there we go, because I showed you in one of my previous tutorials that Visual Studio needs to have the Lua extension. You could just dot Lua after it and it should just be fine and work. So here's our empty file, and if we just open up by dragging to the left here, we've got the scene template that we created in that last tutorial. I'm literally just going to select the whole thing, Control A for all, and then I'm going to copy it, and then I'm just going to put it in here, P. And if you remember in my last tutorial, I literally went through and put these little line of print commands. Now that it exists, I'm just going to call it GP1 all the way down, so that when we run this file and it becomes executed in the memory of the game, our console over here will tell us how far through this file we have loaded into memory, so that we can debug problems as we transition between one file to another. Sometimes what happens is that the commands do overlap and they do get merged and muddled, and it can cause a bug in our app. By having this little command, we visually know what the game is doing in the console because it's telling us, and it means that later on when we get a little bit more complex in our game, we will be able to debug a little bit nicely. So just for the moment, just trust me, we've named the file and we've just updated those little print statements. And as you can see, when we run this in a minute, let's come back to our app. I've asked it to there we go. And we've now got on screen here, oh, there we go. We have run this program, this scene template code. We've gone through the started section, as in the actual, let me just come up to the top here and show you where that is. In fact, actually, let's follow the same conventions. I'm a bit of a OCD freak at times. I like things just the same way all the way through. Okay, so now we can see that we're in file GP1, which helps us when we've got like loads of files to be managing. And we've loaded this started section, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Then we've created the app. So we've created any objects, images, variables that we're going to need to use. Then we've dived on into showing the app on the device. And again, we've got nothing there at the moment, but we know in the memory that the game has tried to show these things, and it will show in a moment, and then it has shown. These are two different stages of the show process. So think of it as a theatre, whereby you've got your theatre manager running around behind the scenes, getting all the actors ready, and they're hiding behind that curtain, so they will show in a moment when they go on the stage, and then they have shown, or they did show, when they're actually on the stage doing their performance. So if you think of it like that, you'll kind of get an idea of why we need to prepare things in memory before we need to use them, and then we physically can just show them, and it speeds up the actual process, and there's no lagging from the user's point of view as to waiting for things to pop up and cause that irritation. Is the app working? Has it broken? Has it paused? Has it crashed? That kind of doubt will disappear because we've prepped things before they are actually needed to be displayed on the screen. Now if we scroll on down here in the scene template, we've got the hide, will hide, or hide did. Okay, so we're in this section here. Now this hasn't actually played out yet because we've not closed the file. So in the same way that that sort of play manager would be working in a theatre and prepping everybody to go onto the stage, when the actors come off, they'll need to quickly take off all their costumes and have them looked after by someone so that they're ready for next time they want to use it, and then they can go and take off all their makeup. So if you kind of think of it as a two-stage process, removing things from the device memory and the display as well, as in things are going to hide and then they have hidden. So that's a two-step process in reverse. And then finally down the bottom here, we've got this destroy event, which basically happens to tell the memory that this scene has now closed. We're not going to use it anymore, and you can go tidy up the device memory and reallocate memory back into play if we need to use it in the future, because some of the images aren't needed anymore, or the objects that we've created are no longer needed, they've been deleted, and that kind of thing. So that's kind of closing and tidying things away, a bit like when you shut down a computer and it does its admin and it puts all its files and closes all the apps and all the programs and all that kind of stuff. This is kind of closing the file down at the end. So at the moment we have basically gone through this process just to make sure that our system is set up correctly, which it is, and we've basically told our main file instantly load, remove all that clutter on the screen, and go straight over to our GP1 scene, which is exactly what we've got here. Now, I said to you I was going to show you how to find out more about the composer. So if you basically come over to the Corona Labs documentation, again the link will be below. They are still migrating everything over to the Solar 2D name convention, so it might have changed at the time you're watching this video, so just watch out for that. But we are going to look at the I can't speak. The guides here. We're going to go to user interface and scenes, and then we've got this composer library. Now this is one of the guides that basically explains what happened. So if we scroll on down, we can see here kind of like this flowchart diagram. Let me just move myself to the other corner. That kind of explains in a visual process what I've just walked you through. So we've just witnessed in the composer these sections loading. So here we go. This is where the file gets started. Nothing is initialized, nothing shows on the screen. Okay, then what we've got is that create event taking place, and then we've got the show will. So this is preparation. Then the event, the actual app is on screen, which is the show event did, and then we prepare for it to remove the screen, and then everything has closed down and it's hidden. And then if we need to, depending on the app we're designing, we can go through this process in a loop. So for example, if you was playing a I don't know, like a game that you need to reset all the characters because I'm just trying to think of a game that you would reset the characters on. Say for example you're trying to do a maze, a game or an app that's a maze, and you work your way through and you get part way and you've got lines everywhere and you can't find the exit. You might want to hit that refresh button. If you hit the refresh button, that whole app will refresh and reinitialize all of the gameplay, and then you can go through the process again. But what you don't want to necessarily do is reload everything into memory because it's already there. You just want to refreshen up the screen. So that's why you would have this looping process here. And then finally, when the actual file is no longer needed, the scene is no longer needed, we basically would go through that destroy event and basically remove everything from the event, the scene. We basically remove everything from the device memory, okay, which is basically what is going on here. So this is kind of a visual way. Now this actual composer library, I do suggest, doesn't matter how old you are or what your skill and your coding concept is, if you've not done the Lua environment before, I do suggest this is one of the actual guides that you literally read from top to bottom. It's one of those that you probably won't get if this is the very first touch point of using this. You will not probably understand more than, like, I don't know, 20-30% of it at the time. But it's one of those things that as you build up your game, you will read again, and your layer will sort of, your knowledge will layer up, and suddenly you'll get those little light bulb moments when things start to happen. And as and when we go through the development process of this app, and we have some challenges with things hiding and being destroyed and it overlapping and interfering with the next scene that's coming on to view, I will refer back to this and show you why you've put those little comments in here just to help yourself, and everything will start to fall into place. So just, I suppose what I'm saying is just trust me, work the way that I am helping you to work, because I have got to this conclusion through lots of trial and error myself in the past. Okay, so we've got our GP1. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're just going to create our characters, the noughts and the crosses. Okay, so now that we've got our files set up, we need to actually start doing something with our app. So as I just said to you, we're going to start creating the noughts and the crosses characters to actually help the players mark their turn, as it were. So I'm just going to dive on over to the left hand side screen now, whereby we are looking again at the Corona Labs documentation, because what we're going to use now is the display library. Okay, so we're going to come down to the API reference library here. On the left hand side we've got display, and then if we move on down, we've got all the different functions that we can work with within the display library, all pre-programmed and created for us. So we've got a new text object that we can create. Okay, so we basically think of it as saying we're going to display a new text object on screen. All right. Now this particular object, as it were, has a legacy version, which means that this is how the syntax used to be laid out for writing code for using this particular function. This will still work, it just means that at some point it probably will become redundant, so it's always best, if you can, to work with the most latest version, but they've left that information in there. Say for example, you are working on an app that you created, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, and you want to just double check the syntax, you might need to still refer back to this code, for example. So that's why both the versions are showing, but we are going to work with this syntax here, whereby we create the object and we pass to it a variable that has a whole list of parameters telling the new text object how to display itself. So these are the parameters, or the different arguments that you can give this particular object. So first of all, we can tell it its parent group. Well, we're going to deal with groups and how we manage our content in a few tutorials time. So for the moment, as it's optional, we're going to leave that one out, but it will be added. We do need it. We've got to obviously give it the text, which we are literally going to use as the capital letter X and the capital letter O to create our symbols. This is the X coordinates. Remember, if you haven't watched the videos before, the link will be below, we have to work with the Lua Coordinate System in order to put things on the display. So this is where on the horizontal line it's going to show on the screen, and its coordinate vertically. Then we're going to say how big in width and height, if we need to use that the text will be wrapped. So for example, if we've got a very long sentence and obviously we've got a portrait phone, we don't want our text going off the edge of the screen, so we're going to need to wrap it onto the next line. So that's how we can control like an invisible box around our text. And then we've got the font that's going to be used itself. Now for the moment, we are going to work with the sort of the system's native font. I'm just looking for where it says that on here. It probably has it in the example below, but we can also change the size of the font, and we can also align it sort of center, left or right. Okay, so when we look down here at some of the examples, I'm just going to come on down. Here we go. This is a nice example of how they have set their text up. So they've given it the word hello. It's going to be 100 units in from the left, 200 units in from the top. It's going to wrap at 128 characters. They're going to use the system device, so that's basically saying if whatever mobile phone you're using or tablet, that device will have a font that it uses as its default. So if we don't name anything else, it's always going to use the system's native font. Size and height, so we can just copy that, and then what we've got down here is we're going to give those options, we're going to pass those parameters to the object as it's created, and we're going to store it in a local variable, and then we can actually give the color, the variable some color, which is what that command is at the bottom. By default, I think it says it actually up here somewhere, the default color, there we go, is by white. So if we don't actually set that object parameter, as it were, to white, then it's good, the system's going to do it by default. Okay, so let's just copy that whole lot, and we're going to convert it and tweak it to make it our own. So I've just copied that. Let's minimize, and we're going to come over to our GP1, and at the moment I'm going to place it at the top of the screen because we need to design our options. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut that part and I'm going to put it in the create. Now I will change the location of where this lives in the future when we get more into designing our app and why that is, but for the moment we just want to make sure that this is showing the way we want. So let's put in our capital letter O for our noughts. So I'm going to call this options noughts, and we are going to leave it as display content center X, and we're going to copy that, and we're going to make it here. Now, if you have watched one of my previous tutorials on how to I think I'm going to take the width out. I think the width was optional. If you have watched one of my previous tutorials on the Lua Coordinate System, that you'll know that it's easiest to always place things in the center of the display and then work out from where it needs to be located, because then you can physically see it, because everything goes off in all directions in infinite forever and ever, and it can be easy to lose things. I'm just going to see if the width, this is optional, and the height is optional, and the font is optional, and the size. So let's just take all of the clutter out so we don't know width. We can remove. I'm going to leave the native system font in there for the moment, and the size, and I'm going to take this out as well. So let's, because we will want to change it in due course. So I'm going to save that, and I'm literally just going to copy, and I'm going to repeat it, because we're going to actually want to create the crosses version as well. So we're going to give this one crosses, and then it means later in a moment we can style these different colors. Okay, so I'm also going to copy this, and I'm going to put it underneath. Right, so we're going to call this one crosses. Let's call it character crosses, and we're going to call it, oh, copy, I'm going to put noughts first. So we've got two local variables that live just inside this particular create event. So if I wanted to access character noughts from down here, I couldn't do so, because it doesn't live up here outside the event for all of the scene to access. Now, I'm not going to go into that too much detail in this particular video, but for the moment, just make sure that you're inside the create, in between that function start and end. And if you are using Visual Studio, you'll see this little bar to help you understand where you are. Okay, I've saved it. Don't worry about this at the moment, because it's trying to do things and we haven't finished giving it all the controls. So we're going to come down here, we're going to get the options for noughts, and we're going to update that, because that's the parameters that we need to pass to the object when it creates our nought. And we're going to take our crosses options, and it goes in there. Now these colors, let's just change that, copy and paste, and copy and paste. Now we can color our objects. What these colors are is RGB values. Again, I've kind of touched on it in other videos. So let's say we want to leave this as a red character, we can leave that as an as a 1 value there in that RGB, so red, green, blue. But we want to create this one as blue, so we're going to give that a value of 1. You can easily go and find some tutorials on the RGBs. I will cover it in the future, but for the moment we're just going to give the value of 1. So it's think of it as like 100% blue and 100% red in those locations, and I'm going to save. Hopefully that will get rid of this error. So I'm going to it says here, do you want to relaunch the project? I'm going to click yes. Okay, now if you look very, very closely, in the very center of the screen we've got these tiny little characters. That's because our font size is only 18. Purely for the benefit of just doing this tutorial, making sure everything works, let's make them 100 so that we can see them. And don't forget, they are placed in the very center on the x-axis and the very center on the y-axis, which is why it's right smack bang in the middle of our screen. Now that I've made that tweak, we've got the little dot up here showing that we need to make a save. So I'm just going to hit Control Save, and there we go. So now we know our app and our environment is working. We can physically see something on the screen, and we are all good. Now we can talk about fonts in a later episode, so that we can start styling this, and we will do RGB values in a later video so that we can, you know, tweak this to make it our own. But for the moment, we know that this gameplay scene 1 has loaded onto the screen. We know that it's only halfway through having executed this particular file, which is great. And at the moment we have been able to create noughts and crosses. So we've kind of learned the object of today's lesson, which is basically to understand a little bit more about how the composer scene works and to get some player counters on screen. So thank you very much for watching this episode. We're going to dive on in and now start making the board itself, and we're going to add a background in our next video to start sort of pimping up our display a little bit more. So if you haven't, please do subscribe. please leave some comments as well. Ask me questions if there's anything you're not sure of in the comments below. I do check my videos at least 2 or 3 times a week. I dive in and have a nose at what's going on my YouTube channel, and I'd like to see what you think. Thank you very much.